2022 Toyota Corolla Cross versus the Toyota RAV4. Which is the better SUV to buy? That's what we're going to find out. Welcome to Car Corner, where we help you, the consumer, master the process of car buying and car ownership. If you're thinking of buying a small SUV like the Corolla Cross or the RAV4, but you're not sure which one to go for, then this video is for you. I'm going to go through the pros and cons of each SUV and help you decide whether it's worth it to spend the extra money on the RAV4. We're going to start things off behind the wheel of the Corolla Cross, which Toyota introduced for 2022 to sit just below the RAV4 and above the CHR in the Toyota lineup. Now, until the Corolla Cross was introduced, if you wanted a small crossover that wasn't a RAV4, you had no choice but to go for the CHR. The issue with that is that the CHR is a pretty polarizing looking crossover with a cramped interior, and it only comes in front-wheel drive. The Corolla Cross, by comparison, has a much more conventional SUV look to it, with a higher ride height, more interior space, and it offers the option of all-wheel drive, which a lot of buyers are looking for. Now, one of the major differences between the Corolla Cross and the RAV4 are the drivetrains. For the time being in North America, all Corolla Crosses come with a 2-liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine that makes 169 horsepower and 150 pound-feet of torque. Now, I say for the time being because in the near future, the Corolla Cross is also going to be available with a hybrid drivetrain, which is already available in other countries. I'm really looking forward to driving the Corolla Cross with the hybrid option because, to be perfectly honest, this 2-liter 4-cylinder engine is not the best. The biggest issue with it is that it just doesn't make a lot of power and it's pretty noisy. It's perfectly fine when you're just driving it around the city at normal speeds, but trying to merge onto the highway end, it gets pretty loud and you need to be pretty patient. Now, to be perfectly fair to the Corolla Cross, much of the same could also be said of the 2.5-liter engine found in the RAV4. Even though the RAV4's engine does produce more power, 203 horsepower and 184 pound-feet of torque, it's definitely no powerhouse, and it's a pretty noisy engine as well. The biggest difference between them in terms of the way they perform has to do with the transmissions. Where the Corolla Cross comes with a continuously variable transmission, the same one found in the Corolla, the RAV4 uses a conventional 8-speed automatic. Now, there's nothing wrong with the CVT in the Corolla Cross. It performs perfectly fine, and it doesn't have any of the reliability issues like you find in some other CVTs. That being said, the 8-speed automatic in the RAV4 is a bit better at disguising the lack of power and the engine noise, which makes it the better performing transmission of the two. Having said that, there isn't much of a fuel economy difference between these two SUVs. The Corolla Cross is rated for between 29 to 33 miles per gallon, or roughly 8 to 10 liters per 100 kilometers. The RAV4, by comparison, is rated for between 27 to 33 miles per gallon, or roughly 8 to 11 liters per 100 kilometers. Even though the Corolla Cross does have slightly better fuel economy around the city, it does have a slightly smaller gas tank, which means that you'll most likely get better range with the RAV4. Now, of course, all of that changes if you go for the RAV4 Hybrid, which has much better fuel economy than either gas engine. The RAV4 Hybrid is rated for around 40 miles per gallon or 6 liters per 100 kilometers, which makes it the fuel economy champion. And not only do you get better fuel economy with the Hybrid, but you get a little bit more power and a much quieter driving experience too. Now, it remains to be seen whether the upcoming Corolla Cross Hybrid is going to be as good as the RAV4 Hybrid, but I definitely can't wait to find out. Next to the drivetrains, the other major difference between the Corolla Cross and the RAV4 has to do with the dimensions and the interior space. Compared to the Corolla Cross, the RAV4 is 5.3 inches longer and 1.1 inch wider. And those extra inches do add up to a more spacious interior. Now, that being said, I definitely wouldn't call the Corolla Cross cramped. Compared to other subcompact SUVs like, say, the Subaru Crosstrek and the Hyundai Kona, this is actually a pretty spacious SUV. Not only is there plenty of room up front, but you have a decent amount of space in the back seats for a pair of adults to sit comfortably, and you have plenty of room for a pair of child seats to fit no problem. The bigger difference between the two SUVs has to do with the cargo space. The Corolla Cross gets 25.5 cubic inches of cargo space versus 37.5 that you get in the RAV4. Although it's not as spacious as the RAV4, this is still more cargo space than you get with other subcompact SUVs. Now, aside from the dimensions and space, there really aren't that many differences between these SUVs when it comes to the interiors. Both have a very similar control setup with the exact same touchscreen infotainment systems. Even though the touchscreen that you get in both the RAV4 and the Corolla Cross is starting to look a little bit dated when compared to some other SUVs, it is pretty straightforward to use, and it does come with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. And the rest of your main controls below the screen are very approachable and easy to use with a straightforward setup. Another thing that's great about both of these SUVs is that all trim levels come standard with Toyota Safety Sense 2.0, which gives you a lot of great active safety features. This includes valuable safety features like automatic emergency braking, adaptive cruise control, lane departure warning with lane tracing assist, and lane keep assist. The only active safety feature, which you do have to pay extra for on the Corolla Cross, is blind spot monitoring with rear cross traffic alert, which does come standard on the RAV4. Aside from that though, this is a very well equipped SUV, and I really like the fact that even though the Corolla Cross does cost less money than the RAV4, Toyota really didn't skimp out on too many features. The other thing that's really nice about the Corolla Cross is the way that it drives. It has very comfortable suspension, great handling, and excellent outward visibility thanks to these large windows all the way around. And because of its smaller size, it's also easier to park and maneuver than the RAV4, which should be advantageous for those who live anywhere where parking is a little bit tight. Overall, I am very impressed with it, but it's time to get behind the wheel of the RAV4 and see how it compares. Alright, behind the wheel of the 2022 Toyota RAV4. Now the big question here is it worth it to spend the extra money on the RAV4 over the Corolla Cross? When comparing the two SUVs back to back in terms of pricing, the RAV4 is roughly $4,000 to $5,000 more expensive than the equivalent Corolla Cross, so there is a pretty significant price difference between the two. Now whether it's worth it to spend the extra $4,000 to $5,000 on the RAV4 versus the Corolla Cross really comes down to your priorities. If your main priority is to have the most amount of interior space possible, then it might be worth it to spend the extra money on the RAV4. This interior certainly feels a lot roomier than the Corolla Cross. There's a lot more room to stretch out in both the front and rear seats, and the cargo area is noticeably bigger too. Now that's not to say that the Corolla Cross is a cramped SUV, because it is more spacious than some of the other subcompact crossovers that it competes against, like the Hyundai Kona and the Mazda CX-30. But if you ultimately need to have more interior space and cargo space, then the RAV4 is the one to go for. The other noticeable difference is the way the RAV4 feels on the road. This is a more substantial feeling SUV. You feel like you're sitting a little bit higher on the road with a solid, more planted feel. Now because it is a bigger SUV, it doesn't feel quite as nimble as the Corolla Cross, so parking and maneuvering might take a little bit more effort. But that's a trade-off you might be okay with when you consider that the RAV4 does give you better performance and more power too. The 2.5-liter four-cylinder engine produces 203 horsepower, which is a lot more than you get with the Corolla Cross. But even though the extra power is noticeable on the road, this engine is no quieter than the one in the Corolla Cross, and it does get pretty noisy when you're accelerating hard. Ultimately, I wouldn't say that one SUV is any more comfortable than the other, and both of them make great commuter SUVs. The one major difference, however, that does give the RAV4 a major advantage is the fact that it is currently available as a hybrid and a plug-in hybrid, which is something that you can get in the Corolla Cross in North America, at least for the time being. The RAV4 Hybrid is a huge leap over the regular gas version. It produces more power with 219 horsepower versus 203, which is noticeable. It's a lot quieter on the road with a much smoother drivetrain, and it gets much better fuel economy too. The RAV4 Hybrid is able to achieve around 40 miles per gallon or 6 liters per 100 kilometers, which is around 30 to 50% better than the gas engine in the RAV4 and a lot better than the Corolla Cross too. And not only are you going to save a lot of money on gas, but the RAV4 Hybrid doesn't cost a lot more money than the regular gas version either. The price premium is only around $1,200 to $1,800 depending on the model that you look at. Now it is worth mentioning that Toyota will eventually offer a hybrid version of the Corolla Cross in North America, which will probably be available sometime in late 2022 or early 2023. And when the Corolla Cross Hybrid does become available, this comparison is going to be a lot tougher. But for the time being, if I had to pick any one of these models to go with, I would be going with the RAV4 Hybrid. There's no question that the Hybrid is absolutely worth the small price premium when compared to the regular RAV4. And it also makes the RAV4 a lot more appealing when compared to the Corolla Cross too. If you're comparing these two SUVs when it comes to their gas engines, however, then this comparison does become a lot closer. And ultimately, is it worth it to spend the extra $4,000 to $5,000 just in order to get a little bit more space with the RAV4? Well, for many buyers, I think the answer is probably going to be no. Ultimately, for those who don't need that extra bit of interior space, the Corolla Cross does seem like the better buy. You're not really sacrificing much when it comes to features, technology, or safety, and you get the same great reputation for reliability and high resale value too. So for anyone who is thinking of buying a Toyota RAV4 and is not dead set on buying the hybrid, take a closer look at the Corolla Cross because it just might surprise you. So let me know what you think of the 2022 Toyota RAV4 and Corolla Cross. Which of these two SUVs would you buy? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. You can also take a look at some of my other videos by checking out these links over here. Make sure to follow me on TikTok and Instagram. And if you need any additional car buying advice, recommendations, or help with getting a great deal on your next new car purchase, make sure to check out carhelpcanada.com. Thanks so much for watching, and see you next time.